You
Well,
you
yeah,
speculated in the book that he might have ran out of light bulbs on his big camera. That's the reason he used the hobby camera.
yeah.
So that makes
Again,
sense.
reasonable speculation. We don't
Right.
know, but that could be
Right.
why. Yeah.
Reasonable speculation though. Right. Yeah.
He had only a limited amount of film and photos, and if it was deemed an emergency, he would have just grabbed anything and run out there.
Right.
It could be, I name him in the book, a very distant relative of mine named Garland Fronabarger. He was known as One Shot Frony. He would take a picture of someone and then walk away because he wanted to save on film. He was a bit of a cheapskate, but it was the Depression era and money was hard to come by. So it kind of made sense. My mom says when she was in college in Cape Girardeau in the 1950s, she and her, not sorority, but her girlfriends were posing for One Shot Frony, took a snapshot and walked away. That was his method of operation. So the Reverend looked at all of this, and he had to have been absolutely dumbfounded because aliens were not in the mainstream whatsoever. There was probably nothing that you ever gave any thought to your whole life. And here are these three humanoid-type beings with big bulbous heads, big black eyes, tiny little dots for nostrils, and a tiny little slit for a mouth, and no ears. He thought their skin was kind of wrinkly, crinkly. And to this day, we don't know whether he was talking about their skin having an adverse reaction to the atmosphere on Earth, outside the contained atmosphere in their spaceship, or if they were wearing flight suits and they were somehow melded to the body or something like this.
Paul, you touched on this you touched on this in the book, and that is there's been an ongoing debate for many years of whether when people see these gray aliens of whether that's their skin or some sort of melded flight suit. I mean, people have been talking about that for 40 or 50 years. No one can really seem to tell.
If our government would just open the files and tell us, then we wouldn't have to speculate, and we'd keep hearing we're going to get stuff, but
that's
we never
right.
do.
Yes, very
Don't
true.
blame us. We're amateur investigators. The government knows. But.
By the way, this is completely off topic, but I do it since you kind of alluded to this. I have to bring this up. So today is the 79th anniversary of the crash at Roswell. And I don't know if you've heard this. There's some speculation. Now, we're taping this on Wednesday at 2:00 Central Time. That there's some speculation that the president today is going to make some announcement about alien life. I don't know if you've heard this or,
Oh, yes. I've read this for months and months, and it doesn't appear as though it's going to happen. If it is, it's going to be a big surprise because no one's mentioned this sort of thing.
And there's no contact either. I just saw a press conference at NATO, and it's like, nothing like this came up, but I have speculated that he's not going to make this announcement until 2 weeks before he leaves office because it would be so disruptive, nothing else would get done. That's my personal feeling, but I do think he has the ego to want to do this because the president that does whatever president is going to go down in history. So I kind of assume he would do it.
It sounds like reasonable speculation to me. We'll see what happens. Recently, the Department of Homeland Security had these boxes of super secret files, and they may have been related to UFOs. I don't know if you heard this, but the CIA came in and just stole them, took them from them.
Yes,
I don't know if they flashed guns around, by force, but this shows you the government agencies can't get along, and they're willing to hide this information, even take it by force from other government agencies. Oh my gosh.
Paul, I used to have Jazz Shaw was a regular on the show till he passed away about a year and a half ago, and he was connected to the Pentagon. He was basically the UFO writer for Salem Media, and he wrote for the Debrief, and he was really connected. But he was connected to the Pentagon. He told me at that time, and you've probably heard this, but I heard it from him secondhand, and that is there's a huge debate or basically war within the Pentagon of whether this stuff should be released. That there's a huge conflict on this,
I hear that as well within agencies, and maybe like the NSA, the DIA, the Defense Intelligence, the CIA, and some have some information and others don't. Philip Corso wrote about The Day After Roswell, very famous book about 1947 and the recoveries from the Roswell crash. And he described aliens almost exactly like Cape Girardeau's, and that they were felt by scientists after scrutiny and autopsies that they were bio-robots, that they were kind of clones made in a kind of lab to do the dirty work of a higher race of beings who didn't want to come to Earth. And why not? World War II was going on. It was very dangerous on much of Earth in 1941. So if it did crash, that would explain why nobody bothered to come back for the wreckage of the bodies. They were just mechanisms punched out of a mold, I guess, in a factory, wherever planet they were from, and they were a dime a dozen. So they were poking around Earth for some reason. Cape Girardeau is cattle country, dairy country. We have a lot of cows, and you hear about cattle abduction or mutilation. We can't say for sure that's what they were there, but that could be one excuse. Or they were hit by a stray shot from the European battle theater or the Japanese assaults on Pacific Islands and just sputtered to a halt in Cape Girardeau. We don't know.
Mm-hmm. Let's get back to the story of on April 24th, 1941. So the thing is, these three bodies were pulled out of this thing, and according to Huffman, one of them was still breathing, right? One were basically barely alive. Right,
just barely alive. It was respirating, and it just expired right while he held it by the wrist.
Yeah,
and he just let it go limp, laid on the ground. So it was a kind of being that needed air, but I don't think our oxygen-rich atmosphere was too healthy for it. And in fact, the person who, probably a farmhand, who went rushing out to the crash scene expecting an airplane and found this circular disc, he innocently tried to pull these bodies out and lay them flat on the ground, side by side on their backs. But that may have killed them. They're outside the protected atmosphere of their craft and the air that they were accustomed to breathing. And once they got out in our air, they asphyxiated. And you may have read in the book that General George Marshall later said, we've had 3 UFO crashes, and in all cases, they incinerated from within because they couldn't breathe our atmosphere. And I thought, that sounds pretty believable, doesn't it?
Right. So now the real amazing thing about the story is that this is probably, I mean, I don't think you're going to tell me I'm wrong, but this is probably the first documented UFO crash on American soil where the military responded. The only other one I can think of is Aurora, Texas in 1896, but that went, that was so long ago and people didn't know what was going on. This is probably, am I right about this? Is probably the first one where there was a coordinated response to it. Am I right with that?
And we got, the military response got lucky. The sheriff of Cape Girardeau County in 1941 used to live in Sikeston, Missouri, about 35 miles south, where they had an aerial training program from the Army Air Corps, and his brother was one of the executives in the program. So obviously, he picked up the phone and said, we've got a crash. It might be one of yours, or it might be something really strange. You need to get up here and see this and maybe bring a small troop. And that's what happened. Reverend Huffman said while they were looking over this craft that he got a peek inside and the bodies, this military unit arrived and told them, put all that evidence down, the debris, the shrapnel, put those bodies down. We'll take all of your notes and your film from any camera. This never happened. This is a matter of national security, and you're never to speak of this ever again. And Reverend Huffman was pretty shook up by, first, the crash, and second, the government coming in and bossing everyone around and telling you to keep quiet. So he promptly went home and spilled the beans to his family. If he was sworn, he kind of broke that oath. He said, I'm going to tell you this once, and then I'm never going to speak of it again. Because his family was aghast when he came home, and he was pale and shaken, and that he said, this is what happened to me. You remember that phone call I got earlier in this evening? We thought we were going out to an airplane crash, and it turns out it was something else entirely that came down in these bodies. And he looked into the craft. I'm sure there were flashlights and lanterns illuminating the scene, which had caught fire. The fire department was there trying to put out the blaze. And he said he saw a little spaceship with little seats and gauges and dials and such, and a silver band around the flight deck or cockpit in the interior. And that band had strange symbols in it that he couldn't make out, like hieroglyphics or something. So I thought this was a pretty interesting and candid response, that he didn't understand everything or maybe anything of what he was looking at. And this was all astonishing to him and would leave a man not prepared for this all shook up, as Elvis used to say.